Welcome to Question Mark, the podcast, exploring the greatest story ever told with open minds and open hearts.
We light it up, we won't come down, and the sun can't stop us now. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show, where it's covered in all the colored lights, and the runaways are on in the night. Impossible comes true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show.
Hello and welcome to Question Mark, a fortnightly podcast about Mark's Gospel, perhaps the greatest story ever told. And whether this is your first time or you're a regular listener, we're very pleased to have you with us today. My name is David Payne, and I'll be your host for this, the 29th episode of our journey through Mark's Gospel, which we think is as relevant to the life in the 21st century as it was to first century believers. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce our special guest, Neil Maddock. I've become accustomed to interviewing one actor who plays Jesus, and today we have two with us. Neil, I've seen you playing Jesus on stage, directing some big productions about Jesus. I believe you created a presentation for Platinum Jubilee. Didn't quite get to see it, but I'm pretty sure you also manage a coffee shop in Southampton. How do you fit it all in? How would you introduce yourself, I wonder? And how do you know Steph? Have you performed together?
Lots of questions.
So many questions. Tell us about yourself.
I will. I may not do them in that order, but
no, that's fine.
We'll try and cover everything. So yeah, my name is Neil. I'm originally from Bristol, but I've lived in Southampton now for over 20 years, and I am a creative communicator. So I run a charity called Martis Productions, and we exist to creatively communicate the Christian faith. And like you mentioned, that involves large-scale evangelistic productions such as the Southampton Passion in 2011, a big outdoor event. We've done a nativity musical, which I know you were involved with yourself, David, in 2012. We've done other outdoor events, and more recently I've sort of developed some one-man stuff, so it's sort of easier to transport around. And I met Stefan, I don't know what year it was now.
2016, I think, Neil.
Oh, he's got the date etched in his memory.
Yeah,
Look at that.
Couldn't forget that.
Changed his life.
Yep.
So we met because he was working on his one-man performance of Mark's Gospel, I Am Mark, and we started chatting, and he asked for me to sort of watch and sort of journey with him a little bit on that. And we ended up going to Edinburgh together in 2019, 18.
Yeah.
And had a great time up there, just experiencing the festival. And I was his musical accompaniment when we went out on the streets, and then for the performances that Stefan did in Edinburgh. And we've sort of just kept in touch and worked together ever since, and partnered together in different ways. Apart from Edinburgh, we've never performed together on a stage. But I know certainly he sort of inspired me with his one-man stuff that he does. And I think when I was looking at different ways to communicate the gospel, that sort of influenced me a little bit in what I was then seeking to do. So yeah, that's been that. I do currently run a coffee shop as my sort of day job, based in Central Hall in Southampton. So I run that Monday to Thursday, and then I do the creative ministry outside of that. And I get to preach in various churches around the region. I very much see that as creative communication as well, just trying to sort of unpack the word of God and make it relevant for people's lives today. Have I missed anything?
No, that was perfect.
Well, really good.
Okay.
I did wonder why it's Martis. What's Martis?
So Martis comes from the Greek word in Acts 1 verse 8, where it says Jesus sends out his disciples and says, "You will be my witnesses." And that word witness is a Greek word martis, which is where we get our word martyr from. And so Martis Productions seek to be a creative witness to the good news of Jesus Christ. So.
Fantastic. I'm sure our listeners all knew that, but I'm very glad you told me. So
of course.
Thanks, Neil. That's great. Looking forward to hearing from you in a minute. And Stephen Smart is back doing what he loves after a break of a couple of years for some reason. He's taking his one-man performance of Mark's Gospel around the country, supported only by a chair. They will be appearing together at the Edinburgh Fringe in August. Steph, I imagine most of our listeners know about your I Am Mark presentation, but would you like to update us on the latest developments in the journey? It's quite a busy time, isn't it, at the moment?
Oh, incredibly busy. And in fact, in 2 days' time, I'm going down to Cornwall to do the production in the very places that Wesley preached in. That is miners' pits in Cornwall, in the open air. So it's going to be quite a challenge. I don't know what on earth is going to face me when I get down there, whether I'm going to get a crowd of 3 or 4 or whether it's going to be more, who knows. But I'm really, really excited just to be doing something so kind of, out there, really. It's a bit unusual.
Literally.
And then certainly, the Edinburgh Fringe comes up again soon. So on the 5th to the 13th, I'll be there for an afternoon performance for 9 days. In fact, David, you'll be there too, will you not?
I will. I won't be playing any music, but I will be there supporting you and cheering you on.
You will, and I'm so grateful for your help. I think the one thing I wanted to say about Neil was what an amazing guy, and I'm going to spare his blushes a bit here, but he is the most generous and wise chap. For anyone who doesn't know him, I just couldn't recommend him highly enough, and his performance. So there you go. It's been great to work with you, Neil.
Blushing, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, are we ready to go then? I'm going to hand over to Lucy Warner before we blush any further to read today's passage. Lucy.
Mark chapter 7, verses 31 to 37, New International Version. Jesus heals a deaf and mute man. Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon, down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. There some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, "Ephphatha," which means, "be opened." At this, the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. "He has done everything well," they said. "He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak."
Thank you very much, Lucy. Well, firstly, Neil, I thought we'd let the guest go first, if that's all right. What are your initial thoughts when you look at this passage? Is there a main point you'd like to start with?
I think it's just another great example of Jesus doing what he does best in terms of really meeting a very specific need of somebody. And what jumped out at me as I read this is it's great doing something like this because you go back to familiar stories. That as a Christian, I've been a Christian over 30 years and probably read this story numerous times. But when somebody actually asks you to think about it and share your thoughts, and it's a good opportunity to kind of really reflect on it. And as I was doing that and looking at it, it just struck me of how there's a lot of detail in this. And the more I sort of read around it and thought about it, it's the way that Jesus sort of tailors his response to this particular individual to meet his need. And I think that just challenged me a little bit about how I respond to people's needs around me. Bigger picture, how, the church needs to think about how we respond to the needs we see around us if we're going to follow the model that Jesus gave us. So I think for me, it's that sort of detail and some of the nitty gritty of the story that, this was that there were fingers in ears, there was, saliva on tongues and all sorts of things, and, taking the man away from the crowd. Lots of little details that Mark tells us that are there because they're significant, and they show us that Jesus knew what this man needed and he went to great lengths to meet that need for him. So
brilliant. I'm sure we'll hear some more of that. What about you, Steph? What's this passage about?
Well, I just wanted to say a little bit about what Neil said. I think that's brilliant because it does seem to me Jesus is particularly conscious of what the man's needs are, and he's conscious of the particular situation he's in. And so everything he does seems to be tailored, as he said, Neil, to the fact he's deaf, the fact he can't speak properly. So basically doing things that are going to help him rather than speaking to him, to touch him in various ways, is a good way of communicating, I'm paying attention to you lovingly and compassionately. I mean, that may be one explanation for all the things that Jesus does. So, yeah, I think the other first impression I have about this miracle is the fact it's just, what a miracle. I mean, I'm not saying no, and some of the other miracles weren't astounding. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying Jesus is basically pulling out all the stops, and everything you'd expect in a miracle story is happening in this one. So he's basically he's telling people, don't tell anyone. That's something he does quite conventionally, doesn't he? Don't tell anyone. He does some spitting. He does some laying on of hands. He does some taking someone to one side. He does some sighing and deep groaning. I mean, he's looking up to heaven. He does that quite a few times in different miracles. But in this one, it's all at once. Everything is kind of packed in. So, I'm just wondering aloud, I guess, is this because this miracle is particularly significant? I have to say, I think it probably is. And I think for me, the significance lies not so much in the fact that it happened, although that's incredible and wonderful, but what it means, what it might mean in the context of the rest of the story, what it might mean in the context of Mark and his listenership, what it might mean. That for me is even more exciting, I have to be honest, than the miracle itself.
I was going to ask whether it was an actor's joy with all those things in one go to have to do all that. We'll save that for another day, maybe. So we got some listeners' questions. We'll see how we get on with them, shall we? The first one, so there's kind of three sections, really. The first section, Jesus traveled quite, N.T. Wright in his commentary says, 100 miles in over a period of time. He went a long way. He wasn't just sort of going from one town to the next, to the next, to the next, and then off to Jerusalem. Yeah. He was on a mission, it seems to me.
Yeah.
What was he trying to achieve? Neil, Steph, you want to sound as though you want to start that.
Oh, I think it's interesting, isn't it? The geography is fascinating here.
Yeah.
I've kind of got the impression that he's not actually doing a straightforward journey here. He's doing zigzags.
Yeah.
So I hadn't realized this until recently, that Tyre is south of Sidon. So it says he went from the coasts of Tyre up north, Sidon, down again to the Sea of Galilee, across to the 10 cities. He's going all over the place. And so that seems, I know that there are biblical scholars out there who will say, oh, well, Mark has just kind of, got his facts wrong. Can't have possibly done it. But I don't know. The only thing I would say that holds them all together is the fact that they're pretty much all of them in Gentile territory. And for me, I think that's really, really, really significant in a way that maybe I'll go on later to explain. So, yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. Like you just said there about the Gentile territory, I think, Jesus, yes, of course, he came to speak to Jews as well, but primarily he seems to have gone to the places where the sort of the non-believers, the non-Jews were, because they were the people that he wanted to meet and minister to and ensure that they got the good news. Because if it was maybe left up to the religious leaders of the day, the Jewish priests and Pharisees, etc., then they may not have ever gone to the Gentiles, because as we see later in Acts, as things develop, there was that reluctance. Even Peter, I think, is it? He's not sure that he should then be going to the Gentiles, and it's only when Paul, the Apostle Paul, comes along that, and there is that thing, isn't there, that Paul is an apostle to the Gentiles and Peter to the Jews, that sort of thing. There is still that sort of tension, even as you move into the early church.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think this tension that we're talking about, I think it's even evident in the story, not only from Jesus's opponents, because just recently, as you rightly say, Neil, in chapter 7, it's talking about, how Jewish people are distinct from Gentiles and they eat in a certain way. You have to wash your hands and stuff like that. But Jesus kind of blasts away at all of those rules and regulations and says, it says at the end of that story, Jesus declares all foods clean. So there's a connection being made between Jews and Gentiles there. But it's also the disciples themselves. I'm really beginning to think that the disciples are having big problems about the Gentiles. they do not like the idea of ministering to the Gentiles. This is, and to be honest, I understand it. As far as I can tell, it is obvious why they wouldn't want to do it, because it's what they believed. It's against their religion. It's against what all they held dear, to sit down and eat with people who were more infidels, really, not belonging to God's people. They were the opposite. So Jesus doing what he's doing and going and ministering to them is just completely out of the box.
Yeah.
You're saying Jesus had to make a big effort to make it really clear, I'm going to this town, I'm going to this town, all Gentile towns, you notice.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying, yeah, definitely. But the story before this is the bit that would have really riled those disciples, I would imagine, which is the story of the Greek Syrophoenician woman. And she was 3 times a Gentile. She was a Greek, she was from Syrian Phoenicia, and Jesus allows her to heals her daughter, but also says, there is bread for, and this is quite an important point, I think, bread for the Gentiles as much as there is for the Jews. We can argue about how reluctantly or otherwise he agreed to that, but he basically said that was the case. And that would have been unbelievably out of the box as far as the disciples were concerned. And then the evidence, I think, for why they might feel unhappy is the fact, I think that one of the main things is he has to force them to go into Gentile territory in the first place. He tries to force them to get to Bethsaida, which is a Gentile place. They just don't want to be there. They do not want to be there. Anyway, I was going to say, though, it doesn't just stop there with the disciples. I think it also has an implication. I mean, can I mention this? Because I think it's not something we've talked about much on the podcast, but obviously Mark himself is writing at a certain time. And at the time he was writing, there was a revolt, wasn't there? I mean, we think that the gospel was written about 70, something like that, 70 AD, and maybe a bit before. But at that time, there was a Jewish revolt. The whole revolt had started, as I understand it, because some Gentiles forbade people to go into the synagogue to offer their sacrifices, a particular synagogue, and they actually carried that sacrifice of their own out. This is what Josephus says. And the Jews found that unbearable. So they were basically sworn enemies. And the Romans, of course, well, who would the Gentiles side with, the Romans or the Jews? And when the Romans come to destroy Jerusalem, well, most likely they wouldn't side with the Jews. So there was this real tension going on. And in Mark's community, you'd have a mixture of people, probably Gentiles and Jews together. And you can imagine that situation where there's actual enmity of a involves physical violence between the two nations. And yet Jesus' example is, hold on, no. God's goodness, generosity is for everyone. Imagine that. It's like saying to the Israel now today and the Palestinians, God loves you both exactly the same. What are you doing fighting each other? Which actually one could argue is the truth.
Neil, do you want to say anything more about that first section? Friends brought them along, didn't they? Again, that happens.
Yeah.
That was another thing that came up, Steph, that often comes. Friends bring somebody along to.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly in this case, I read somewhere that somebody made a comment that this guy would have needed friends to bring him along because he would have never heard about Jesus because he's a deaf man. So he wouldn't have heard reports. Obviously, we have no idea if any form of sign language existed back in this day. So whether people could communicate with this man or not, but he certainly wouldn't have heard the buzz about Jesus and heard that he was coming to town, etc. They probably didn't have big posters up everywhere advertising like Stephen's got in Edinburgh, So he needed people to take him to Jesus because the people that took him knew that was probably his only hope now for ever being able to hear and speak.
Yeah. It's lovely, isn't it, that people are so compassionate. I get kind of challenged by that. I think about, do I do the same sort of thing when I think about praying for people? Am I that compassionate to go out of my way to bring them in the same way, and them? It's a big challenge. It happens quite a lot in Mark, doesn't it?
Oh, it is. When you bring it down to a very personal level, it is that challenge for each of us, isn't it? Is when we meet people, which we probably all do constantly, who are suffering in some way, is our thought, oh, hang on, let me take you to somebody that's going to be able to help you with that. Just as we would say, well, let me take you to my chiropractor if you've got a bad back, or my whatever podiatrist if you've got bad feet, or whatever it is. If I'm getting those medical terms wrong, forgive me. But just as we do that, do we say, oh, you're sick? Well, let me take you to Jesus. You're broken in some way. Well, let me take you to him because he can mend you. It's a real challenge.
And I think they also must have had some faith, mustn't they, that Jesus could do something about it. They wouldn't have done it. Oh yeah, we'll see what happens. But they had a conviction that actually this man, he was able to heal them, and in fact he's healed so many people. So you can trust us, guys. He is going to help you, no doubt. And that level of faith is extraordinary.
There is a question about the last few words of that section, which is why do people beg Jesus to place his hands on them? Do you think is that how he usually does it? Jesus seems to do it all sorts of different ways, doesn't he? Is there anything about laying hands on?
Well, I because you kindly sent this question through ahead of time, I did a little bit of cheeky research. It is interesting that if you go back through Mark, there is a whole variety of types of healing. From where demon possession, Jesus just speaks. It's a verbal command, and the problem is solved. Then you have Mark 5, where the woman touches Jesus's garment and she's healed of her bleeding. So arguably Jesus doesn't do anything there. He's just present and his power goes out from him. Then you have in Mark 5 as well, you have the daughter of Jairus, and Jairus comes to him and say, can you come home and lay your hands on her so that she will be well? So again, that shows that there is this understanding in people's minds that the laying on of hands is significant. But it doesn't always happen that way, because then there's another occasion where I can't remember where it is now, but somewhere, where has it gone? Oh, there it is, Mark 3. In Mark 3, there's a story, and Stefan will probably know it better, will know it better than I do, of where somebody with the disheveled hand, the deformed hand, and Jesus doesn't even speak to the hand and heal it. He's talking to the crowd, and then he says to the man, now hold out your hand, and it's already healed. And that for me is you could almost liken it in the sense of a performance to a modern day magician who's talking to the crowd here, and then suddenly goes, ta-da, here's the thing you've been wanting to see, because the miracle's already happened, and Jesus didn't lay hands on that person. He didn't even speak to the person. It was just the healing occurred. But then going back and back into the Old Testament, God did tell people to lay their hands on certain individuals at certain times, and it was this sort of passing on of a blessing. And so I think that probably was partly the custom and the culture, that to receive something from somebody, there needed to be a laying on of hands. In particular, in Numbers, the book of Numbers, Moses is commanded to lay his hands on Joshua to commission him to be the new leader of the people of Israel. From my very brief research, that seems to be the first record of God telling somebody to lay a hand on somebody else in the sense of releasing some kind of blessing or anointing for a certain purpose. Here endeth the lesson.
That's really
that's brilliant.
Brilliant, yeah.
And I guess also he's being personalizing, Jesus, like you said before, personalizing healing for individual people. Did you want to add to that, Steph?
No, I think what Neil said was fantastic.
All right.
Yeah.
Spit. Sorry, that's not an instruction. Talking about spit, sorry. It's going to come up a few times in Mark's Gospel. Yeah. A listener says she's not sure how she'd feel if someone put their spit on her when praying for healing. I wonder whether you have any thoughts about this aspect of the healing. It's not the only time Jesus uses spit. So we're talking about the middle section where the man's healed.
Well, the particular thing about this one is it's not just putting spit on somebody, it's putting spit in somebody's mouth.
Yes.
Which is kind of the next level of gross, isn't it?
Yeah.
If we're being really honest. It's not just spit on your eyes like the previous stories we have, or in other Gospels. It's like, this is going, you don't want to think too much about it, really. And And yeah, I think I would be slightly weirded out if somebody offered to pray for me in church on a Sunday and said, now just relax, but I'm going to spit and put it in your mouth. Because, especially post COVID and pandemic stuff, that wouldn't be allowed, would it, nowadays? So
Not
it is
encouraged.
No, exactly. It's very much discouraged. But I mean, interestingly, I think back in those times, that culture, people believed that saliva had healing qualities. And so even though to us, it may seem like a really disgusting, random thing to do, when you understand it in the culture, actually, Jesus knew what people were thinking. He knew what they believed. And especially as, like you were saying, Stefan, like Gentile believers, it might have been an old wives' tale, who knows? But people were like, oh, okay, spit. Oh, yeah, that makes things better, doesn't it? And so again, I think it's that tailoring this particular miracle to this particular man in a way that he can relate to and he understands. Because there's a process as well to the miracle, isn't it? It's almost like it's fingers in your ear. It's like, well, I know this is where your problem is. Then it's the saliva on the tongue. I'm going to give you back your voice. I'm going to deal with this area. And then he goes into the looking up to heaven, acknowledging God's power. And then he goes into the sigh, which I think we might discuss a bit more later. So yeah, it's disgusting, but Jesus knew exactly what he was doing. So
it was a different culture, wasn't it? I mean, I think we have to say that. Steph, do you want to?
Yeah, I
mean,
think two or three things come to mind. I think like brilliant about saliva. I guess also it helps a man's faith, doesn't it? If he thinks about saliva. Oh yeah, he's putting saliva in my mouth. That means there's something that's about to happen. I can expect something good to happen right now. I'll be honest. If you're going to talk about the sigh and all the other stuff, I'm thinking, no, don't do that. Because I have to say, I'm the more I think about the sigh, and I'll probably be pilloried for this, but the more I think about all the mechanics of the healing, I'm thinking we're probably missing the main point here. So I'm in no disrespect to the listener's question, whatever the next question is going to be about. If it's about the next physical aspect of the healing, yeah, maybe I'm happy to talk about it. But I've got this frustration in a way within me saying, oh yeah, but we're missing the big bit, the big point. So you'll have to forgive me, guys.
Go ahead. we got two streams going on here, I think, Steph, but that's fine. I mean, I was saying before, wasn't I, that people get different things out of the same passage at the same time, and even on two different days you can. So we'll manage this, but you go ahead. What do you want to say about this bit?
Okay. Well, yeah.
We'll talk about the mechanics, Neil.
Okay. Fair enough.
We'll do the earthly bits. You do the spiritual.
He's done the homework.
Okay. So I would say what is not spiritual actually is this word ephathatha. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, frankly, even though I'm supposed to read it when I form it. Ephathatha. It's Aramaic. It means be opened. And I used to think when I was a young Christian, it's a magic word that Jesus is using. Nothing of the sort. So anyone's got that impression, just talking about the mechanics again. Yeah, very briefly. I would say for me, it's all about opening up, and it's all about something more than physical opening up, because I'm sure, Neil, you'd agree with me. It seems to be about opening up on a spiritual plane as well. And the reason I say that is because clearly Jesus himself has made the connection earlier in Mark's gospel about ears and not having ears to hear or having ears to hear. And he's made the connection between that and whether we're closed or open in our hearts in order to receive God's message of salvation. So there is that's going on here. And so as soon as I pick up on that, I think, hold on, it's really great what's happening on a literal level. It's brilliant. And if I was that man, I'd be amazed and happy, and I'd be overwhelmed with wonder and all the things that you'd expect from a miracle. But on another, even more wonderful level, there's something being said about humanity in general and about what God's blessing and promise is for us all. Much, much, much more important than just the life of one individual, however wonderful this event was. I think the real part of the story that holds this really clearly is the ending. Now, I have to say, for some, what I'm about to mention might be quite controversial, but it has to be acknowledged that what I'm about to say has at least an element of truth. You can't get around it. You can't avoid it. At the end, the last words, and this isn't a literal translation of the last words. In the NIV, it goes something like, let me see. People were overwhelmed with amazement.
Mhm.
He has done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. And even in the NIV, I think if most of us, if we were kind of quite biblically literate, would probably be thinking, hold on, I've heard that before. Where have I heard that before? And yeah, you probably have. It's a direct, almost direct quote from parts of the Old Testament, particularly Isaiah. But if you go to a literal translation of the Greek, you get that connection even more clearly. So here's a good, accurate, literal translation. He has done all things well. He both makes the deaf to hear and the speechless to speak. So that phrase, he has done all things well, first of all. Now, we could argue, and I think it'd be fair to, that the people really said this. Or you could argue somehow the connection, the echo, which we're going to mention, is maybe something Mark put in their mouths. I'm not going to even comment on what actually happened, what is happening here, but the echo is clear. He has done all things well is an exact echo to the end of the creation story in Genesis. God saw that he had done all that he had done, and behold, it was very well, which is another literal translation of the Greek Old Testament, which Jesus would have been using. God saw all he had done, and behold, it was very well. In Isaiah, similarly, 35, verses 5 to 6, then will the eyes of the blind be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame leap like a deer, and the mute tongue shout for joy. Water will gush forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. So for those who are alive at the time of Mark's writing this, who were listening to the story, they would have been well versed in those verses. We're not so much these days, but they would have been, and they would have picked up on, hold on, something bigger is happening here, bigger than just one man's story, however brilliant it is. And they would have thought about, first of all, the creation story, and they would have thought about what Isaiah is talking about. And if you look at Isaiah 35, what he actually is talking about is God coming to reclaim his creation and to restore it to what it should be. Specifically, in the first place, Israel, but not just Israel, the whole of creation. Then will the lame leap like a deer, the mute tongue shout for joy. Then will the eyes and the blind be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. So what is that saying about Jesus? This is the bit that's exciting. God has come in the form of Jesus to reign on the earth. I actually, sorry to go on, but I'm going to stop in a minute. But I actually thought, how am I going to make this easy to understand? And I thought, and hope God forgives me for this, I thought I put it in the words of God himself, as if God was speaking to us right now. So here it goes, okay? This is what the passage, I think, actually implies. I've come and I've started it. I'm retaking charge. And it doesn't just include Israel. It's everybody. This man is a Gentile. It's everybody. The whole world. I'm restoring it to what it should have been like. And one day it will be complete. You guys, Mark's followers, Mark's listeners, you guys are the first fruits. This is how you should live. Listen out to what happens in the story. But all will be revealed at the end of the age. This is the wonder of what I'm doing. And I won't repeat it. This is it. There is no other salvation under the sun. Believe the good news. Repent. Change your thinking. God is coming. God has come. And he's changing things for the better. And this is the only answer to the whole of the world's problems. The only one. It started already and it's going to finish soon. Are you going to believe it? Are you going to join in? Or are you going to hold off and say, no, it's not for me? I think that is a fantastic message. And I'm saying this story captures it.
Right. Yeah.
It's good.
Like that. Good. Do you want to say anything to that, Neil? Or I was going to ask, in the last section, Jesus told the people not to tell anyone, and they went and told everyone. I don't know what you think about that. Why did he want to keep it quiet? If it's such big news, Steph, I don't mind who goes first now.
I don't know, because he's done this a few times, hasn't he? Jesus says, like, don't tell anyone, go and do what you need to do in terms of temple and cleansing, etc., but don't spread the word. And I think timing is a big thing in the Gospels and in the life of Jesus. He spent 30 years not doing much, arguably, in terms of not doing anything, public ministry, really. And then he only had 3 years of actually traveling around doing these zigzags that we thought about earlier, and doing the actual stuff, the miracles and the signs. So I think it was about, maybe he knew it wasn't quite yet time for him to get the profile that he was going to get. So then you could argue, and I don't have an answer to this, you could argue that was it the fact that the people couldn't keep quiet? Did that speed up the process of the religious leaders of the day needing to act and doing what they did? Could Jesus have had longer in his public ministry here on earth if people had actually kept a bit quieter about it and word hadn't spread so quickly? We could have longer gospels because Jesus actually had 5 years of traveling around because he was able to keep things quieter for a bit. I don't know. We trust and believe that God's timing is perfect in everything, like I do as a Christian. So, but you could think of it as that way. I think it's almost like he didn't want necessarily the hype. Jesus is humility personified, and I think he didn't want lots of people going around bigging him up, and talking about how great he was, because ultimately it was about God. He wanted to point all glory to God, and we know that Jesus always went away to pray by himself, and that's how he kind of then came back ready for the next stage of his journey. But I wonder about the deaf man, because obviously he gets healed, and we're told that he can then speak plainly instantly. He's healed and he speaks plainly. And I think, I wonder if he did what Jesus said and kept quiet, or did he go and join the crowd and start telling everybody as well? I think I'd be tempted to start going around telling people, have some fun with it. Go up to people and pretend you couldn't speak, and they go, "Ha ha! I can speak now." But who knows?
Yeah. I love that, and I also think this idea of speaking plainly is quite fascinating, because it's like, I was mentioning earlier about the heart thing, that it might be a kind of a sense of, where's our heart? Is it closed up or is it open?
Yes.
If our heart's open, we can speak properly. This man could speak before, but he couldn't speak properly. So there's something about, receiving with an open heart, then being able to proclaim the news. I don't know why Jesus. I mean, I agree with you. It's about timing, possibly. Jesus probably didn't want to be. Isn't there a bit in John's gospel where they try to make him king almost against his will? Or maybe it's another gospel. They try to make him king, but it's not the sort of king that Jesus really was. So it's like I'm shying away from publicity because I might actually give people the wrong idea, or I might get in trouble too early. And there is a particular time, as you say, for what I'm supposed to be doing.
I think also I remember reading somewhere that what people were doing is they were getting fixated on the miracles. They wanted the signs and the wonders. And arguably, maybe that's partly why they were bringing people to him all the time. It was like, here's another one, do another one, do another one. Show us what you can do.
Yeah.
And I think maybe there is a part of that Jesus was actually, it's not about the physical stuff I'm doing. It's about your heart condition, like you were saying. It's about you becoming right with God. And it's about, having your spiritual ears opened and your spiritual eyes opened, and having your heart ready to receive all that God wants to pour into your life. And so that could be another reason why he's not wanting people to talk about it loads, because he doesn't want them to be all about the miracles. He wants them to actually listen to some of his teaching as well and take that on board.
We're talking about timing, and the clock is ticking away here. Neil, while we've got you here, I would love to ask you, you seem to have a passion to spread the message of Jesus, and we've loved hearing your thoughts about this passage. I wonder what it is for you about the gospel that makes you get up on the stage and run a charity and makes you so passionate. What is it about Jesus and this message?
I first became a Christian when I was 14. I say first became. I became a Christian. I didn't do it multiple times. I became a Christian when I was 14, and it was because somebody stood up on a platform in a conference and said 3 very simple things, and it may have come across today. I'm actually quite a simple person. And those 3 things were that Jesus forgives you for your past, he gives you new life today, and then you always have a hope for your future. And throughout my Christian life, that's been the foundation, the bedrock of it, is that I know because of what he went on to do on the cross. I don't want to spoil the end of Mark's gospel.
No.
What he went on to do, that's about the forgiveness, not only for my past, but for each day of my life, the things I get wrong because of his grace. And I get to live as a new creation. I get to live as somebody with my eyes open and my ears open, and who can speak boldly and plainly. And then I always have hope for my future because of what he's done for me. No matter how desperate things may seem, I know that I am in God's hands and he has a plan and purpose for my life. And so I want to share that with other people. And it says in Romans that everybody who calls on the name of God will be saved. But how can they call on him if they've not heard about him? And how will they hear about him unless somebody goes and tells them? And so for me, I'm all for social justice evangelism, social action, meeting the needs of people, very, very much so. But I think also we need people like myself and Stefan, who are then going to go and actually tell them about Jesus in creative ways that they can relate to and understand as well.
Brilliant. You mentioned a quote before the show. Do you want to just read that out? That seemed to sum up some of what you were.
Yeah. I found it in a life application Bible. And it was talking about how this healing was very specific, and Jesus tailored this moment to this man and the needs that he needed met. And it said that if there is only one means of witness in our church, as in sermons, for example, many people may likely never hear the good news. Our churches need lots of different methods to meet diverse needs. And then this is the bit I enjoy. It says, so let musicians play, singers sing, actors act, writers write, and let each creative Christian tell the story. Jesus used spit and mud. Surely we can find windows to the minds and hearts of all people as well.
Let the creative speak. Brilliant, thank you.
I think it's just the idea of, the church collectively being able to find ways that we can tell these age-old stories, but in ways that are very relevant to people today and the needs that they have in our day and age. So,
and as we found today, different people pick different aspects and see things in different ways from different angles, which is really exciting. Neil Maddock and Stefan Smart, thank you so much for taking time to share your thoughts with us today. It's been a real pleasure, and it's definitely given me some things to think about. Please do join us again or listen to previous episodes, which can be found on the Spotify and Apple Music platforms, and also on YouTube if you want to see our faces. We'd love you to like and subscribe and tell your friends if you've enjoyed today's conversation. We're so grateful to members of the Iron Mark community group on Facebook. You know who you are, and we really appreciate you. If you're not already part of the group, do follow Lucy's instructions about how to find us on Facebook and join in the conversation. That's all we have time for today. So it's goodbye from Neil Maddock. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from Stephen Smart.
Bye.
And until next time, goodbye from me. Goodbye.
If you enjoyed this episode of Question Mark and don't want to miss any future episodes, be sure to click on the subscribe button. This also means other people can find the podcast and join the conversation too. We'd also love if you could leave a review so we know what was good and what we can improve for future episodes. If you want to find out more about I Am Mark, Stephen Smart's solo word-for-word dramatisation of Mark's Gospel, go to www.sleek.bio/IamMark, where you can sign up for free for his newsletter and a whole host of other goodies. Join us and our special guests next time, where we'll continue to explore the greatest story ever told together. If you want to get involved with the podcast or have any questions or comments in the meantime, please do get in touch using the I Am Mark social media channels. We'd love to hear from you.
We light it up, we won't come down, and the sun can't stop us now. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show, where it's covered in all the colored lights, and the runaways are on in the night. Impossible comes true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show.